Hi, I'm Liron Cohen.
And I'm Mimi Torchin.
And you're listening to Lady Parts TV, the podcast.
Whee!
Hi, everybody. I don't know why I'm laughing.
No.
Hi, everyone.
We're just giddy with delight.
I know. This is what happens after 4 straight days of watching news.
4 straight days.
4 gay days.
253 to 214.
Yes. We are here with the fabulous, you may know her as the creator and main performer of Where's My Fish?
Where's my
Jane
fish?
Kramer.
Thank you.
Jane Kramer, a long time, actually not that long, but it feels long, contributor of Talking Teal.
Thanks.
Look at Louisa's. Is that Louisa's tail?
It is Louisa's tail.
It's in a crook. Okay. And me?
Well, yes, you of course.
You introduced me.
Who do not need introductions. Mimi Torchin is in the house, but she's always in the house. Where else would she be?
In the bed, in fact, in the house, which is about where I always am.
So before last week, we thought, we're going to skip this week. We're not going to do a podcast because it's going to be the election, and then. I think because this has been stretching out, it feels like forever, we've had the opportunity for a lot of people to throw a lot of questions our way, because if our political system is confusing on a normal day,
and it is,
it's even more confusing now when it seems like, well, wait a second, why are they always talking about Pennsylvania? And wait a second, if you got 4 million more votes, then what's going on?
Exactly.
So there are a lot of questions, and why are they still counting? So as I saw a meme the other day that said, American Idol can count millions of votes and, a commercial break. What's going on here? A little more complicated in this case.
Well, I think we should have the Oprah Winfrey model of governing and voting, which is you get a vote and you get a vote and you get a vote, right?
And the other thing that bugged me is I've been hearing a lot of fake news, to use the term, from a lot of different countries.
Fake news.
Exactly, from a lot of different countries. Apparently, if the country is more favorable to Trump, or if the leader of the country is more favorable to Trump, or if the people seem to think that Trump would be better for their country, then there's a lot of fake news going on about the validity of our election, about what's really going on, who really is winning.
What Trump said. And apparently Russia is really disseminating that information throughout the world.
Yeah, so I felt that, and since a lot of people obviously get their news from their local news, they don't look to MSNBC or CNN or, I felt that it was important that we try, we don't presume to be experts.
No, we're not constitutional lawyers, scholars.
We're just aficionados.
Yes.
Who live here.
And care
deeply.
Have been deeply immersed, as have many people.
It's frustrating for us, if not more than others.
Yes,
exactly.
I think it's more
to be in it.
I think it's more frustrating for us than anybody.
The three of us.
Yes, the three of us.
Exactly. So, Jane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I know I really had to kind of twist your arm to do. You don't like to talk about politics.
Well, I won't get in trouble when I talk to you about it versus other people who are kind of getting sick of me ranting and raving.
Yeah, and in fact, you will spread out and spread your wisdom to, whoever else wants to listen. So
I'll do my best. So
here's what we're going to do, and we're going to try to keep it as short as possible, though it's there's a lot to talk about, and we're going to try to be brief. We can't go in depth. So as Mimi said,
yes, anything that you're really and truly very interested in, and we have only scratched the surface, pick up your ticket to the information highway, your phone. That's all you need. Go to the Google and look it the fuck up, okay? Because all of this information is there. So we'll give you a little taste. You'll say, what are they talking about? Or you'll say, oh, I see it. I see. If it's, what are they talking about? Look it up.
Just make sure you go to reliable sources.
Yes.
And for the record, Wikipedia is not. Okay, so I thought we would start with a very brief overview of our system, because again, and I think what's important to understand is that our system is different from pretty much everything else around the world, because we like to be different, and because our founding fathers wanted to do something
new,
special and new.
It was an experiment.
And remember this key word as we go along. It was an experiment to be improved upon.
And if it was ever the beaker was ever going to blow up in our face, it would have been this year. Well, it did last year, pretty much.
Right. Last election.
Yeah. Last election.
For sure.
So the way that our political system is built, very kind of the foundation of it, we have a Congress, and the Congress is built by two chambers. One is the House of Representatives, one is the Senate, and they're kind of meant to balance each other out. So whereas the House of Representatives, you get as many representatives as in ratio of the population of the state. So a huge state like California that has, obviously it's the most populous, or is Texas the most populous?
No, I think California is the...
Well, California has 55. Yeah, I mean, California has a lot of representatives, as opposed to a tiny state like Alaska, for example, that will have less representatives.
New Hampshire.
Right. And so that is the representatives are in ratio to the population of the state, as opposed to the Senate, where you have 100 senators, and you have two senators for every state, regardless of the size of the state. And so again, that is kind of supposed to balance it out, one body giving power to the state relative to its size, whereas the other body kind of equal power to all states, no matter what size they are.
Unfortunately, however, the Senate has way too much power.
Well, again, that's part of this kind of supposedly this balancing act. And also, one of the other differences is that in the Senate, the age requirement to run for Senate is higher.
35, I believe.
Right. And the point of that is, the thinking behind that was to make a body of people who were more experienced, supposedly more evenly tempered. They were supposed to be the grown-ups. They were literally supposed to be the grown-ups. And when a law... in order for a law to pass, it needs to pass both bodies of both the House and the Senate. And of course, then there's the president. And the president has the executive power to pass some laws without going through the House and the Senate. The president is not supposed to abuse that.
Executive orders.
Exactly. It's not supposed to abuse that. However, sometimes... the Senate and the House are in such a deadlock because of obstructionism, and we're going to get to the various ways that we've been having obstructionism in our politics very soon. But also, the president also has the power of veto. So if the House and the Senate passed a law and it comes to the president's desk and the president doesn't want it, he can veto it or she can veto it. However, if the House and the Senate manage to get a big majority, I believe it's a 2/3 majority, then they can override the president's veto. So that's basically kind of the general, way that our bodies of governing work. Again, this was an experiment. The Constitution was left room to be amended. We're going to talk about what it takes to amend the Constitution.
Takes too much to amend the Constitution.
It's a system, on one hand, that was meant to kind of maintain stability. It's meant to make passing laws, and especially constitutional laws, very hard. On the other hand, it's made it so that some things are too easy. So every time a new president comes in, it's very easy for that president to overturn many things done by the previous administration. And so we keep going back and forth in this ridiculous kind of way. So we're going to talk more about all of that, but just so that you have the lay of the land. And just one other thing that I want to clarify, a question that we got that we want to answer before we move on, which seems relevant as we sit here and, get little chunks of votes come our way every, 12 hours or so. How voting works in the United States. And there are three major ways of voting in the United States. And depending on what state you live in, you might have a combination of two or three of those. So the first is the most obvious one. You go to the poll on election day, you cast your vote. The second is called early voting, which is basically the same as what you do on the day of the elections, except
you can do it early.
Some states open their polls a few days earlier. You can go and cast your vote a little earlier.
This is because, especially with voter suppression,
we'll get to voter suppression.
The lines are incalculable sometimes.
Right, and another thing that for other peoples around the world they would be surprised is we don't have a national holiday on the day of the election, and so people still have to go to work, people still have to go to school, and so it's harder. There's less time, there's less opportunity to vote. The third way is mail-in vote, which is, for example, Mimi and I are right now on Martha's Vineyard, but we're registered to vote in New York. We can request an absentee ballot, justify it by we're not going to be in our state at the day of election. And then we get it in the mail, we fill it out, we send it in. This year, because of the pandemic, everybody pretty much was allowed to request an absentee ballot on the basis
ballot, they called it.
Right, a mail-in ballot on the basis of a disease. And so what's important to understand is that some states didn't have even mail-in voting. They didn't have any of the systems put in place to process them. Even if they did, they are used to seeing very small amounts of mail-in ballots, which in this year,
absentee or the
military. Right. This year, this was enormous amounts of mail-in votes, mail-in ballots that came in. Some of these states had laws on the books that said that they could not even open an envelope until the day of the election. So when you ask, for example, why Florida was able to get everything done so quickly, that's because Florida, a state where mail-in voting is something that they always do. They open their ballots when they come in, and so they were well situated by the day of the election to have almost everything already counted. Whereas Pennsylvania, on the other hand,
yes,
Pennsylvania.
Sorry. Go ahead.
You're agreeing.
I was going to say, I am, but it's just infuriating because there were states that begged,
to Pennsylvania,
open ballots beforehand because they knew there would be exponentially a higher amount of mail-in ballots, and then mail-in versus absentee is another thing I'd love to talk about because that's the kind of the genius that Republicans do when they twist language to make it seem like it's a different thing. So it's, fraud, because they're always trying to take away rights and trying to obstruct.
Especially when it comes to votes, because when people vote, Democrats win.
It's true.
Exactly.
Because minority rule.
Yes, majority.
And rule for a long time.
Yes.
And but Pennsylvania, apparently, the state legislature, which is Republican, refused to allow this because they just wanted it to be as difficult as possible, because they knew since Joe Biden had encouraged everyone to stay home and vote by mail,
the Democrats,
stay safe, the Democrats, and Trump said, no, don't trust them, go to the polls. The mail-in ballots were going to be disproportionately Democratic.
Right.
And now Trump is shocked by that.
Yeah. The thing that people also need to understand is that when we're talking about processing mail-in ballots, you have to open an envelope, then you have to open another envelope,
and you have to
iron it out
so
because
it's been fed into a machine.
Exactly. You have to validate. You have to make sure that the person is the person, that the vote is, that the signature matches the signature on record. There are so many, and this is why, by the way, when they claim fraud and all that it's not safe to vote by mail, the voting by mail goes through so many stages to make sure that it's a valid ballot, that it's quite honestly bullshit.
Yes, of course. Colorado votes almost strictly.
And Oregon
by mail.
Exactly. So that's just to answer the question of why is it taking so long. The other thing that is making it take so long is all these various lawsuits that Trump has since filed in all these battleground states that have been kind of slowing down the process. If in one reason because they have to be dismissed, which most of them have been dismissed
almost immediately.
But sometimes they say, well, put those ballots aside until we, get this ruling, blah blah blah. And as again somebody pointed out this morning on MSNBC, that unfortunately, because he's sown so much distrust in the system, then a lot of the news outlets are just afraid to call it before it's like 100% sure.
But they were almost all, they never wanted to get it wrong. So I don't understand why they're...
Any other time it would have been called already.
Exactly.
Any other election.
Why are they afraid of Trump? What are they afraid he's going? They're afraid his people are going to storm
nuclear
them with
weapons. How about that?
Yeah, really.
So
and then that's another thing, carrying guns. But anyway, we won't discuss.
Yeah, no, that is a whole other story. But I do want to say, and then we're gonna start talking about all the various undemocratic aspects of our elections and our system. I do want to say that I think one thing that people need to understand is that our system was created when there were still slave owners. And that has hugely affected the way the system is built, because slave owners, which were mostly
white,
in those
male,
states where we have
wealthy.
Republican states right now, wanted to protect their rights, wanted to protect their rights to own slaves. And, if you think of our Constitution, and here's just one little nugget of meant to be improved upon, the Constitution, didn't have rights for anybody who was not a white man who owned land, and that
what was a slave considered?
Three-fifths of a person.
Of a person, right?
Black people
and
were
women
considered
didn't have the vote either. So
no. So, but just let it sink in that Black people in the Constitution were considered three-fifths of a person. So that just goes to show you that the Constitution was a very flawed document.
That's why originalism is so dangerous.
Exactly. There are a lot of people who keep saying, "Oh, but the founding fathers."
What is it? 260 years. I mean, it is archaic in many, many ways.
And we were always meant to make it a more perfect union.
Right.
Nobody claimed it started off perfect.
That's why they invented the amendment.
Exactly. Okay, so we're going to first talk about the first very undemocratic aspect of our election, which many of you might have heard the term the popular vote, and in every other enlightened country around the world, that would just be the vote. So what the hell does that mean? And Jane, would you like to pick up that subject matter?
Well, it's absurd, this electoral college business, is all I'm going to say. And so basically, in every state in the union, it's a popular vote. The governor of every state is elected by popular vote. State legislations are elected by popular vote. The only race that is not determined by popular vote is the presidential race, which comes from this archaic crap back in the day. I won't go into too many details, but it's incredibly frustrating because you have states that really have no people in them getting as much power as states with 50 million people in them. So really the people are not deciding who the president is. I mean, that's sort of a very basic version of it. And so it's very frustrating because, 6 out of the last 7 presidential elections?
I think 7 out of the 8.
Or 7 out of 8 now.
Yeah.
The Democrats won the popular vote.
The Democrats have won the popular vote, and they've only had 2 presidencies.
Yeah, so the popular vote basically means one person, one vote, which is the way it should be.
Right.
But it's not the way it is, because they wanted to protect
slave owners,
and they wanted to make sure that they had power.
And this is why it all comes down to a handful of states that have so much power, because, California can have 55 electors, New York can have 29, but, and actually in recent history, like the last few years, a congressperson, I forget who, said we can't abolish the Electoral College because then white people will have no say at all. Because the states that have the majority of the electorates have a bigger population of immigrants, of black people, of Latinos. Yeah. And they will determine our election. And oh my God, how awful that would be. So it really, a lot of this stuff, when you boil it down, goes down to racism.
Oh, 100%.
Yes, absolute racism, homophobia, misogyny.
Yes, and class. I mean,
the anti-immigration.
Yes, all of those, those old-time traditional values that we all so love.
Well, and as white men specifically,
yes,
but white people,
but they're white.
Use their power. That's why we're becoming more divided,
right?
Because they're scratching to keep their power when equality to them is losing power, because it is for them.
Yes.
And unfortunately, though, the system is geared to give them more power.
Yes.
And this year, we had this cycle, we had a president who, we have always been divided. Our elections are always determined on a very narrow basis. I mean, one of the things that was so, to me, horrible, many of us, about this election is after the 4 years that this man who was called the president, after he did nothing except bad things.
They're calling it President-elect!
Breaking news!
Did they?
Yes, they just called it President-elect Joe Biden.
Woohoo!
It's
Holy
right on the
shit.
screen.
Wait, on what channel?
MSNBC.
Right, I'm looking at it right now. I might be behind.
You should go live. Okay, this is exciting.
Yes.
As we're taping the podcast, we're seeing it right here. They're calling Pennsylvania.
I almost would like to hear. Are we taping this?
Let's talk about the fact, and I'll start crying, that Kamala Harris
is our
we have a woman vice president.
A woman vice president.
And not just any woman, Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris. 273 to 214. Now there's a change of numbers I've been waiting for.
Yesterday, Jane texted me and said, "You'll see, they'll call it while we're doing our podcast." So we'll talk about actually about Trump and why he has more support later on. But let's stay a little bit for a second with the undemocratic aspects of our election. And Mimi, can you tell us a little bit about what gerrymandering is?
Well,
and by the way, could gerrymandering be like the first squish name?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, I looked this up, and that was something that I didn't write down. Gerrymandering is named after was he a governor? The
first person who did it.
Yeah, and I'm just going to tell you exactly. Gerrymandering is when you...
Wait, but it's a combination of his name?
Yes, I know, but what it is when you redistrict. Our states are all broken up into districts. And
every district votes for a representative of that district.
Yes, and it depends on what your representation is going to be, is how many people are in your district. And when it comes time to vote, if it's predominantly Democratic, they'll vote Democratic, Republican. Well, gerrymandering is when you redistrict every 10 years, every time there's a census. And, it's supposed to make some kind of sense. This little group here, this little group next to it, this little group next to it, they're all different districts. But gerrymandering is a way for one party, usually the Republican Party, to draw a district in such a bizarre way as to pick off, it's packing or cracking. And you pack a district by putting a whole bunch of, taking Democrats that might vote in a bunch of other places and putting them all in one district. So they all those votes go into one district. Cracking is when there's a district that has a lot of votes that you want. You break off pieces of it and attach it to other pieces.
And the point is to create more districts with a Republican majority, even if it's a slight Republican majority. And the reason that it's called gerrymandering is because it's a combination of the Jerry, who was the first person who did it.
That was Elbridge Gerry. He was governor of Massachusetts. And someone noticed that one of the districts that he had created looked like a salamander.
Right.
So they made a squish name between Jerry and salamander. And
because those districts were drawn in such a way that was so ridiculous that it was, again, geared toward creating districts with majority Republicans.
And 23 or more states decide districts by the legislature. And then there's a few states that do it with like a committee.
But the point is, it's all local. Each state.
It's done state-wise. It's not, every state has its own way of districting and redistricting. And gerrymandering takes place in a lot of places where there are a lot of people of color, where there are especially a lot of Democrats, and they try to bend the districting to the Republican rule.
So when people say, because my dad asked me the other day, he said, look, I'm looking at the map of the state and it's so red. There's maybe like 2 blue patches. And that's why it is. And because a lot of these places also have very small populations. But then you see an urban area that's blue and it has, the majority of the population of the state living there. So it's all kind of crazy.
Pennsylvania is one of those states. Nevada is one of those states. Clark County and what was the other county where Reno is?
Yeah, I forget.
Right.
Otherwise, everything else is a cactus. I mean,
right.
Right. So it's important to understand that when you see a lot of red, it's not necessarily because it's a lot of votes. It's a lot of sometimes just open land and 3 houses.
That's why Republicans also hate the census.
Exactly.
And why they try to screw with that. All they
it.
do is try to fuck shit up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And actually, here's another thing. Can you talk a little bit about voter suppression, which is insane.
If there's so much of it, like it makes my head explode.
And
it
what bothers me? Because some of the people who are going to listen to it are Australians, and they have mandatory voting in Australia. In many countries, they do everything they can to make people vote. And here...
I was going to bring that up because it all really starts with the registration process, which is also not the easiest thing to do here. And so it should be that as soon as you turn 18, you're automatically registered to vote.
That's right.
Right. Don't want to use that right? Don't use it, but you have it.
There's nothing that makes me more angry than people who don't vote. And I sometimes become irrationally angry about it because there are so many people who have died for the right to vote who still can't vote in this world.
Right.
And it's such a privilege to have that right that it makes me so mad.
And
so when people don't vote.
And then they bitch about the outcome.
Right. So let's start with how it's hard to get registered to vote, right? That's one thing. Then there's so many things. So with the census, so basically just setting up the whole process gets rigged, to use the word, by drawing these crazy shapes to make it so Republicans can get more representation, because they definitely are the minority, 100%. It's like, without a doubt, the data shows it. It's not just us being skewed.
Right.
Then what else is there? There are, you had talked about it earlier, Liron, where your absentee ballot. So it has to go in like 75 different envelopes.
Yes.
It has to be witnessed by someone. Oh, during a pandemic,
Sometimes.
that helps.
Yeah.
Or sometimes.
The signature
thing
has to be
also ridiculous because what if you had a stroke?
Exactly.
What if you registered 25 years ago? My signature's different now.
I've actually heard an expert say that sometimes just being on a certain medication changes the way you sign your name. So it's ridiculous.
Voter ID laws were huge. I grew up in Wisconsin.
Terrible.
Wisconsin in 2016 was the first time they went red since the Reagan landslide in '84. Always a blue state. Trump won by 27,000 votes, I think, and 300,000 people, mostly in Milwaukee and Madison, mostly people of color, were denied the right to vote. 300,000, and it was 27,000 vote difference.
What was
because of ID?
Because of ID.
Voter
Not
ID
to mention
Scott Walker.
Scott Walker is a vile man.
And how about all those counties that have maybe one polling station per county, and people have to drive from far away and stand in line, in line for 8 hours?
Look at that, Harris County.
Yes.
That they said that there could only be one drop-off box.
Yeah, for 15 million people.
District. Harris County has 400,000 people, or anyway,
it's 14 million people.
14 million people, right? It's huge. It's people had to drive miles and miles and miles.
It's almost as if they had to. What? It's almost as if they wanted an abortion.
Right. It's interesting. You piss people off. Look at Georgia. I mean, so there's so many more ways that you can't vote, I guess.
And they're all meant to suppress mostly, first of all, the Democratic vote, of course, but mostly people of color.
Yes. They used to make them pretty much not too soon after they were free men. They had to guess how many jelly beans were in a jar.
True story, people. This is not a mythical story.
How many jelly beans are in this jar? If you get it right, you can vote.
That is an actual true story. So there's that.
What else, Jane?
Let's talk about Mitch McConnell.
Oh, do we have?
To me, one of the most undemocratic things in this country is that the leader. Okay, so let's explain who Mitch McConnell is in the Senate as well as in the House.
Satan.
Yeah, exactly. To put it in one word, the party that has the majority, and I should say, actually, I forgot to mention in the beginning, we vote for candidates. We do not vote for a party. So we vote directly for a specific candidate. Most candidates are affiliated with either the Democratic or the Republican Party. Some are affiliated with a third party, or some can also run independently.
Party, as we like to call them.
Right. So we vote for a candidate who usually represents a party. But it's not like other countries where you vote for the party and the party selects who then represents the party. So the party that has the majority in the House and in the Senate gets to choose the leader of that House or Senate. So Mitch McConnell has been the majority leader in the Senate because he's the Republican and the Republican Party has the majority in the Senate.
And he's been there the longest, right? Isn't it? Oh, is it not done by seniority?
Oh, I don't know.
No, they elect them.
Is it not elected?
They elect them, right?
It's
so
elected.
like Nancy Pelosi. So to me, Nancy Pelosi. To me, one of the most undemocratic parts of this system is the fact that the leader of the Senate or the leader of the House gets to say, no, I don't like this law. I'm not bringing it up for a vote.
Is that true, or did he just
no,
look
it's
for
true.
loopholes to do it?
No, it's true.
Paul Ryan did it too.
Yes, Paul Ryan, and before that,
Speaker of the House.
Boehner,
they won't even bring
like
it to the floor because they know they're going to lose, which is
right.
They don't
You have.
It's one person. It's the dictatorship. It's one person deciding not to bring something to a vote. You know what? Give them the chance to decide for themselves.
It should be a law. It is a mistake. Every law, every piece of legislation, every candidate, everything that should be voted on should be brought to a vote.
The leader,
least.
the majority leader should not have the right or the authority to prevent, and not to mention the filibuster, which I don't think exists anymore, but it was also a way to stall bills and not let them progress. There are so many, again, ways to not even let people exercise their right to vote, which is what we vote them in for. That's what they are there to do. So Mitch McConnell is one of the worst, most hideous
did
people
what he managed to do, what he wanted to do, which was turn the courts
destroy the judiciary.
Yes.
The judiciary.
And in addition, even though
he
has. And even though Joe Biden has now been officially elected our president, we're still waiting to see who's going to have the majority in the Senate, because unfortunately, the Democrats have the majority in the House. We have had it for a couple of years now. And there have been so many bills, including during this pandemic, a bill to help people survive, that have not been able to advance into the Senate because McConnell is an obstructionist. And now that Joe Biden is the president, he will have to deal with Mitch McConnell on a daily basis to try to get him to allow things to move through the Senate.
Obama had the same problem
Exactly.
until he got the House. He didn't have the House or the Senate
for a couple of years.
Well, he had both of them for a couple of years. Right. Didn't get enough done.
Right.
And then for the rest of his presidency, he had to deal with the Republican Congress completely.
Exactly. So that is another reason.
Merrick Garland.
And then they say, oh, the Democrats were in power and they didn't do anything. Yeah, because you didn't let us do anything. Right. We tried. And this is another problem that I find, and it's not just in our country, that politicians these days don't have the interest of the country in front of them. They only care about their own careers, how much money they get from various lobbyists. By the way, here's another undemocratic thing. Lobbying. And Citizens United, the fact that the candidates are allowed to take as much money from sources they don't have to disclose, and this makes it so. Or various corporations, or the NRA. That this is why many of you have asked, how come you can't get rid of that fucking Second Amendment? That means that people can walk around with guns and shoot little children in schools. And this is why, because the NRA, the Gun Association, gives huge amounts of money to candidates campaigns. To then vote their way.
And they threaten them that they will pour money into their opponents' campaigns if they go against their wishes. But let me ask you something, Jane, because I'm not sure about this. Did you ever, and Leroy too, but Jane I think, would know as a longer time citizen. Do you ever remember before Trump people carrying assault rifles, open carry?
No,
I don't ever remember.
I know certain states had open carry, and people might be jerks and wear a holster with a gun.
Yeah, but they didn't.
But
I don't.
What do you? I mean, first of all, they shouldn't even be able to own those weapons. That's
absolutely
separate. Second of all, they're okay. Sorry to say, if they were black, they'd all be dead.
Right.
I mean, how you can go storm a state capitol with an assault rifle?
With an assault rifle.
Well, look at the guy who went into the Black Lives Matter with the assault rifle, and when the police saw him, they're like, "Hey, you should probably go because it's dangerous here."
Yeah, it's dangerous
in my home state.
And if you were
right,
and if he were an African American guy, he wouldn't even have to have a gun. They would have just shot him because he looked suspicious.
Right.
And I heard a person who owned a restaurant talking about this. He said, I think he was from Texas. He said, I see a man coming across a parking lot carrying an AR-15. I don't know if he's coming to get a hamburger or if he's coming to rob me.
Yeah,
that's awful.
Yeah, and so what is the NRA solution for that? Everybody should have a gun. Everybody should have a gun.
You get a gun.
You get a gun. You get a gun.
That would be the Fox News version of Oprah.
Yeah. Speaking of Fox News, here's another big one. Let's talk about, and again, we can't recommend it enough if you've not watched The Loudest Voice. You've got to watch it, not just because it's an excellent show.
Oh, it's such an excellent show, but it also shows you.
It shows you how Fox News came to be, and I would just like to say again that we should file a lawsuit to get them to take the word news out of their name. Because they are not news.
Fox propaganda.
Yes, it is. It's a propaganda machine. It's a propaganda machine, and all connection between the Fox News and the truth is very
tenuous at best.
Yes. Fox News has built people who listen to Fox News, and there are a lot of people who listen to it all day long. Yes, Louise wants the window open.
That's like me and MSNBC.
People who watch...
me too.
Yes, but you know what? But MSNBC at least stick to the facts. Yes, we know that they speak... they've always tried to maintain an impartiality, but I'm happy to say, and I remember when Hillary lost that night, Joy Reid,
don't remind me.
Joy Reid, who is one of my favorite people on MSNBC, she was the first person to admit, you know what, it's partly our fault. It's partly the media's fault. Because...
She said, I'm ashamed to say it, but...
Yes, because they gave the same weight or even more weight to supposedly Hillary's misdeeds as they did to Trump, when you can't even compare the two.
I think they gave more weight to her. They gave way more to Trump. Way more of her misdeeds.
Yes.
Her misdeeds.
It's all the emails, why can't she be trusted? And I think that... Since then, they've been trying to redeem themselves by not, in the effort to seem impartial, by not calling out things that Trump does for the things that, for the truly horrifying, undemocratic things that he has been doing. And I salute them for that. But Fox News, you could say, does the same thing except for the other people. No, because Fox News actually... makes shit up.
Spreads lies.
Yes. Spread lies and skews things in a certain way and feeds their people just made up stories. I can't say it any other way. But also, there's another thing that really bugs me, and that is, why is the DOJ appointed by the president? Because that opens the door to so much corruption and so much danger. Because
yes, but we've never had that corruption before.
Right.
Trump.
But
the DOJ was always an independent body.
It's always supposed to be a system of checks and balances. Right. You're supposed to have people who are not indebted in any way to the other party, so that there could be supervision, so they can hold each other accountable. And I think we need more separation of those powers. I think what Trump did is really expose all the weaknesses and all the vulnerabilities in this system in their, most exposed that we've ever had.
Yes, Biden's going to need at least 2 terms, or Biden and then Harris. because first he's got to sweep up after the elephants. There's so much.
Cleanup.
And it will be an uphill battle because the country is in such division, because half the people, are threatening to sitting outside a poll workers building with AR-15.
And just the idea that he politicized masks.
Yes.
Masks. The thing that could have kept more people alive, could have hastened the end of the pandemic, could have opened up he made it. He made you ashamed not us.
And it's such a ripple effect, because you can see it in other countries. And I was shocked to find in other countries also people claiming, no, it's our freedom not to wear a mask.
Because they turned to us.
Where did they hear that? I wonder. Where did they get that idea,
This whole freedom thing is such an abused word.
It is, because
what does freedom mean, right? Oh, I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm going to die instead.
I'm going to die instead.
Well,
I always say, let him die.
Well, and I didn't want to get into it too much because there's so much that can be said about that. But I just want to say that the one of the most historically traditional difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is this idea of freedoms, that the Republican Party supports small government to give the people more freedom to make their own choices, et cetera, et cetera. However, that's okay when it comes to carry your gun. That's not okay when make decisions for your own body.
My body, right.
Or you have the right to marry whoever you want. So it's so hypocritical. And actually, the party that claims to be the party of freedoms is the party that is trying to put the most amount of limitations on human rights.
And so why do people vote against their best interest?
That's a very good question. That is the $1 million question.
Never understood.